We often measure tiredness by the hours we've worked or the miles we've walked, but the heaviest kind of fatigue doesn't leave a mark on the body. Emotional exhaustion is the silent depletion of the spirit. It is the quiet, grinding realization that you have been strong for too long, pouring yourself into others, your career, or your survival, until the pitcher is finally dry. Unlike physical exhaustion, which usually yields to a good night's sleep, this voiceless fatigue follows you into your dreams. It makes the bed feel heavy and the morning feel like an adversary. It isn't a sudden crash. It is a slow thinning of your patience, your creativity, and your capacity to care. When your heart is tired, the world loses its resonance. You aren't necessarily sad. You are simply overextended. You are living on credit, borrowing energy from a future that you're too tired to even imagine yet. To address it, we first have to stop trying to fix the tiredness and start learning how to listen to its silence. When emotional exhaustion moves from a temporary state to a long-term residence, your inner world begins to feel like an empty room with the lights dimmed. Here is how that manifests in ways we rarely admit. When your emotional reserves are gone, the executive part of your brain starts to stutter. You find yourself staring at a grocery shelf for 10 minutes, unable to choose a brand of cereal. It's not about the cereal. It's that your brain has lost the ability to weigh value. Every choice, no matter how tiny, feels like a high-stakes negotiation. To survive, you start making your life smaller and smaller, just to reduce the number of choices you have to face. In a healthy state, you react to things in real time. When you're emotionally exhausted, there's a lag. Someone tells you a joke, and you laugh 3 seconds too late. Someone hurts your feelings, and you don't feel the sting until 3 days later. Your nervous system is so overwhelmed that it's buffering your emotions. This lag makes you feel disconnected, like you're watching a movie of your life with the audio out of sync. This is perhaps the loneliest part. You love the people around you, but you feel an invisible wall between you and them. You see them talking, reaching out, and needing you, but you can't reach over the wall. You start to crave isolation, not because you're an introvert, but because people are stimulated. When you are at zero, even the love of a child or a partner feels like a bright light being shone directly into tired eyes. Since this fatigue has no voice, it speaks through the body in subtle, non-medical ways. It's the tension in your jaw that you only notice at 3 a.m. It's the way your shoulders have become permanent earrings. It's a specific kind of hollow feeling in the chest, not a pain, but a lightness that feels like you might blow away if the wind hits you too hard. How do you live when you are in this empty room? You don't try to decorate it or fill it with noise. You learn to sit in the quiet until the walls stop shaking. Stop fighting the fact that you don't feel anything. Numbness is your brain's way of putting a cast on a broken soul. It's protection. Let the cast stay on until the bone heals. If you have to do one emotionally taxing thing, like a difficult meeting or a family event, you must balance it with one void activity. Something that requires zero emotional output, like staring at clouds or organizing a single drawer. We often tell ourselves a story that this exhaustion means we are failing. Drop the narrative. This isn't a failure of character. It is a limit of capacity. When the simplest tasks start to feel like climbing a mountain, we've moved past simple tiredness and entered the territory of functional paralysis. Following our previous discussion on the silent architecture of this exhaustion, let's look at why your brain suddenly treats a pile of laundry or an unread text message as a threat to your survival. When you are emotionally whole, you have cognitive surplus. You can handle the small frictions of life without thinking, but when you are exhausted, your threshold for complexity collapses. Everything, literally everything, becomes a project. To a healthy mind, taking a shower is one task. To an emotionally exhausted mind, a shower is actually 12 tasks. Find a towel, check the water temp, undress, wash hair, rinse, dry off, find clean clothes, etc. When your internal battery is at 1%, your brain loses the ability to chunk information. It sees every tiny substep as a separate drain on your energy. This is why you end up sitting on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes, paralyzed by the sheer volume of steps required just to exist. The most expensive thing for a depleted brain isn't the work itself. It's the transition. Moving from resting to doing requires an initial spark of dopamine and cortisol that you simply don't have. It feels like trying to start a car with a dead battery in the middle of winter. You turn the key, and you hear that clicking sound. The intent is there, but the ignition is missing. When the simple things become heavy, they start to pile up. The dishes in the sink, the unanswered email, the plant that needs water. These aren't just chores anymore. They become visual evidence of your perceived failure. Every time you walk past that pile of laundry, you aren't just seeing clothes. You're hearing a voice that says, "You can't even handle this. What's wrong with you?" This secondary layer of guilt is often more exhausting than the task itself. It's a cruel irony. You might still be able to show up for a major crisis at work because your adrenaline kicks in, but you break down because you can't decide what to have for dinner. This happens because your emergency reserve is different from your daily maintenance fund. You're likely running on fumes, using your last bit of survival energy to keep your big life from falling apart, leaving absolutely nothing for the small human parts of your day. When the simple things are too much, the solution isn't to try harder. It's to change the physics of your day. If you can't wash all the dishes, wash one spoon. If you can't answer the email, just flag it. Break the all or nothing cycle. Doing 1% is infinitely better for your psyche than doing 0% while feeling 100% guilty. Every time you say, "I should do this," you are applying pressure to a bruised area. Replace "I should" with, "I don't have the capacity for this right now." It turns a moral failure into a logistical reality. When the world feels heavy, reduce the input, dim the lights, put on noise-canceling headphones, or wear your most comfortable clothes. If your internal world is chaotic, make your external world as flat and quiet as possible. This heaviness is your soul's way of declaring a state of emergency. It's not laziness, it's a forced shutdown to prevent total system failure. This is the strong person's trap. It's the moment where the virtue of resilience becomes the vice of self-destruction. When you spend your life being the anchor for everyone else, you forget that even anchors can corrode if they stay submerged in deep water for too long. Following our previous discussion on the weight of simple tasks, let's talk about the silent fracturing that happens when being strong is no longer a choice, but a cage. Real strength is supposed to be like a tree. It bends in the wind. But when you're trying to be strong while emotionally exhausted, you become rigid like glass. You hold yourself so tightly to keep from falling apart that you lose your ability to flex. And the problem with glass is that it doesn't bend when the pressure gets too high. It shatters. This silent breaking happens internally long before anyone sees a crack on the outside. When you are always the strong one, you inadvertently train the world to believe you don't need anything. You become the rock. People lean on you, they vent to you, and they assume your silence is a sign of stability rather than a sign of depletion. Because you are strong, people stop asking how you are doing. They assume you've got it. You start to feel that if you show a single moment of weakness, you are betraying the people who depend on you. So you keep the mask on, which only increases the internal pressure. At this stage, your strength isn't actually courage anymore. It's compulsive endurance. You aren't getting through it. You are simply refusing to feel it because you know that if you let yourself feel even an ounce of the pain, the floodgates will open, and you might never be able to close them again. This is why you might feel strong during a crisis, but then find yourself crying over a dropped pen or a broken commercial. The pressure has to escape somewhere. To be strong without rest is to essentially tell your inner self, your needs don't matter, your pain is an inconvenience, just keep moving. This creates a profound internal divorce. You become a stern boss to your own soul. Over time, the you that is suffering starts to stop reaching out to the you that is in control. That is when the true silence starts. When you stop even trying to tell yourself that you're tired. If you feel yourself becoming brittle rather than strong, you have to realize that rest is not a reward for strength. It is a requirement for it. You don't have to break it all at once. Find a safe container, a therapist, a journal, or a very specific friend, where you can allow yourself to be weak for 30 minutes. Let the pressure out in small bursts so it doesn't explode. Start viewing asking for help as a higher form of strength than carrying it alone. It takes more courage to admit you're at your limit than it does to keep pretending you aren't. Permission to be inconvenient. You have to be okay with letting people down occasionally. If your strength is based on never disappointing anyone, it's not strength, it's people-pleasing dressed up as resilience. You are a human being, not a mountain. Mountains are built to stand still and take the weather until they crumble. Humans are built to move, to rest, and to heal. The metaphor of slow drowning is perhaps the most hauntingly accurate way to describe the progression of emotional exhaustion. It's not a shipwreck. It's a rising tide that you tried to ignore while you were busy standing your ground. Building on our previous thoughts about the silent breaking and the weight of simple things, let's look at the incremental physics of this slow drowning, how the water rises, and why we don't swim away until it's almost too late. It starts at your ankles. A difficult conversation here, a repressed disappointment there. You tell yourself, it's just a bad day. Because the water rises by millimeters, your nervous system adapts. You don't notice that you're working harder just to keep your head above the surface. You just think life is getting busier. This is the danger of high-functioning people. Your ability to tread water is so good that you don't realize how deep the ocean has become until your feet can no longer touch the bottom. Think of a sponge. A sponge can hold a lot of water and still look like a sponge. But there comes a point of saturation where it cannot take in a single drop more. When you reach this saturated state of emotional exhaustion, a minor inconvenience, like someone being slightly short with you, doesn't just hurt. It feels like it's submerging you. You lose your bounce back. Usually, after a stressful event, you float back up. Now, you just stay under. You stop seeking joy because the effort of swimming toward it feels more exhausting than just sinking. When you are drowning, your brain prioritizes one thing: survival. In this state, the higher parts of you, your creativity, your sense of humor, your long-term dreams, are the first to lose oxygen. You might find yourself staring at a wall for an hour because your brain is trying to conserve air, feeling a physical tightness in your chest that doctors can't explain, forgetting things you used to know by heart. This isn't memory loss. It's your brain cutting power to the luxury departments so it can keep your heart beating and your eyes open. Paradoxically, when you're this exhausted, you often become afraid of relaxing. You feel that if you finally take a deep breath and acknowledge how tired you are, you will lose your momentum and sink forever. You stay tense because tension feels like safety. You're afraid that letting go means drowning, when in reality, letting go is the only way to float. If you feel the water at your chin, you cannot will yourself to be dry. You have to change your relationship with the water. The most exhausting thing you can do is try to act like you aren't drowning. Acknowledge the depth. Tell someone, I am underwater right now. What are the things tied to your feet? Is it a toxic habit of saying yes? Is it a relationship that only takes and never gives? Is it a self-imposed standard of perfection? You have to cut at least one anchor to gain buoyancy. Sometimes, the only way to recover is to flip onto your back and do nothing. No splashing, no struggling, no fixing. Just letting the water hold you until you regain enough strength to kick toward the shore. The water didn't get this deep in an hour, and it won't recede in an hour. But the moment you stop fighting the reality of your exhaustion, you stop wasting the little oxygen you have left. The exhaustion of the unspoken. It's the point where, if someone asks you, what's wrong? You stay silent. Not because you're being difficult, but because the answer is too long, too tangled, and too heavy to turn into sentences. Building on the slow drowning we discussed, let's talk about the emotional debt that accumulates when feelings are bypassed rather than processed. This is why you can't explain your fatigue. You aren't tired of a thing. You are tired of a history. Every time you felt a sting of hurt but said, it's fine. And every time you felt a wave of anger but whispered, not now, you didn't actually delete those emotions. You just moved them to a pending folder in your subconscious. This is emotional debt. Just like financial debt, it collects interest. Eventually, your brain's storage space is full. You aren't reacting to the argument you had today. You are reacting to the 300 times you didn't stand up for yourself over the last 5 years. How do you explain that to someone in a single conversation? You can't. Usually, people expect a big event to justify exhaustion, a breakup, a job loss, a grief. But emotional exhaustion is often a mosaic. It's made of 1,000 tiny pieces of almosts and barely made it's. The almost argument you suppressed, the barely made it deadline that cost you sleep, the small disappointment of a friend forgetting a detail. Individually, these pieces are weightless. But when they are glued together into the story of your daily life, they become a wall. When you try to explain it, you feel silly mentioning the tiny things. So you say nothing at all. When you are this depleted, the bridge between your feeling center and your language center breaks down. You feel a deep, heavy ache in your soul, but when you look for words, you only find "I'm tired." You realize that "I'm tired" is a lie. It's actually, "I am lonely in my efforts," or "I feel unseen," or "I am grieving the person I used to be." The effort required to translate that complex pain into a language someone else can understand feels like a job you don't have the energy to do. So you choose the silence of "I'm just stressed." There is a specific exhaustion that comes from always being the bigger person. Every time you took "it's right" regarding a feeling, you were essentially swallowing poison and calling it patience. This creates internal friction. Part of you wants to scream, and part of you wants to be good. The energy required to keep that scream muffled is what is actually killing your spirit. You aren't tired of life. You are tired of self-censorship. If you find yourself unable to explain your tiredness, stop trying to justify it with logic. You don't need a reason that fits in a tweet. Your body is the evidence. If you feel exhausted, the reason is everything, and that is enough. Start acknowledging small feelings in the moment. Even just saying to yourself, "That hurt my feelings," without needing to fix it, prevents that emotion from being added to the pending pile. When people ask, and you can't explain, give yourself permission to say, "It's not one thing. It's just been a long season and my cup is currently empty. I don't need to talk. I just need to be still." You aren't dramatic for being this tired. You are a person whose emotional ledger has been out of balance for far too long. You've been paying everyone else's taxes with your own peace. The pivot point where we stop looking at exhaustion as a failure and start seeing it as a sacred intervention. Building on everything we've discussed, the slow drowning, the silent breaking, and the unprocessed debt, we have to address the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves, that this state is a form of laziness. It isn't. Laziness is a choice to avoid effort. Emotional exhaustion is a biological mandate to survive. Think of your emotional system like the electrical grid of a house. When you plug too many appliances into one circuit, work, family, hidden trauma, perfectionism, the breaker trips. The lights go out. This isn't the house being lazy. This is the house preventing a fire. When you feel that deep, heavy stop in your soul, it is your internal safety mechanism cutting the power, because your nervous system can no longer handle the heat of your life. If you try to force the switch back up without removing the load, you risk a total burnout, the fire. The "listen to me" part of this exhaustion is often a demand for integration. We spend so much of our lives performing, being the strong daughter, the reliable employee, the happy friend. Emotional exhaustion happens when the gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be becomes too wide. The fatigue is your soul saying, "I cannot keep up this version of us anymore. It's too expensive." It is a call to stop the performance and return to a version of yourself that is allowed to be messy, tired, and incomplete. When your inner voice says slow down, it's not because it wants you to do less work. It's because it wants you to process the backlog. As we discussed before, you have a pending folder of emotions. When you're moving at high speed, you can't process them. Your mind demands a slowdown so it can finally digest the grief, the anger, and the disappointments you've been swallowing for months. If you don't slow down, those emotions stay stuck in your body, manifesting as physical aches and brain fog. There is a profound intelligence in your exhaustion. It is trying to save you from a version of your life that is no longer sustainable. It stops your productivity, because your productivity is killing your peace. It stops your social life because your social life was actually social service. It stops your strength because your strength was actually self-neglect. So how do you respond to a call that feels like a collapse? You don't answer it with a to-do list. You answer it with presence. When you feel a sudden heavy "I can't" regarding a social invite or a task, stop labeling it as a weakness. Say, "My system is protecting me right now. This no is an act of health." Spend time where you aren't trying to fix the exhaustion. Sit with it. Ask yourself, if this tiredness had a mouth, what is the one thing it would ask me to stop doing today? Usually the answer is the very thing you are most afraid to let go of. When the voice says ease up, respond like a kind parent would to a tired child. You wouldn't call a crying toddler lazy. You would dim the lights, give them a warm drink, and let them sleep. You deserve that same mercy. The exhaustion isn't an obstacle to your life. Right now, the exhaustion is the work. It is the most honest part of you finally speaking up after years of being silenced. When sleep shifts from being a biological necessity to a psychological fortress, we have reached a very specific stage of emotional exhaustion. It is no longer about resting the muscles, it is about pausing the soul. Building on the idea of exhaustion as an inner call, we have to look at why the subconscious begins to crave the mini-death of sleep. When the world becomes too loud, sleep is the only place where the demands of reality cannot follow you. For the emotionally exhausted, sleep is the only time you are unreachable. Even when you are awake and alone, your mind is still on call. You are thinking about what you should be doing, who you might have disappointed, or the emotional debt we discussed earlier. Sleep is a temporary exile. It is the only space where you don't have to perform, explain, or be strong. When you find yourself wanting to go to bed at 7 p.m., you aren't necessarily sleepy. You are just desperate to stop existing as a person with responsibilities for a few hours. When the slow drowning becomes too much during the day, your brain uses sleep as a laboratory. Because you haven't given yourself the space to breathe while awake, your psyche forces you into sleep so it can try to process the backlog of feelings in the safety of dreams. This is why escape sleep often feels heavy and unrefreshing. You wake up tired because your mind was working overtime in the background, trying to sort through the mosaic of micro-traumas while your body was still. Using sleep as an escape is a form of functional dissociation. When the simplest things become heavy, the brain looks for a quit button. Sleep is that button. It becomes a way to skip the parts of the day that feel insurmountable. However, the tragedy of escape sleep is the moment of waking. That split second when you open your eyes and the weight of your life crashes back down on your chest, that is the most painful part of emotional exhaustion. It's the realization that the world didn't change while you were gone. When the inner call says listen to me, and you don't have the tools to listen yet, you seek the void. This is a space where there is no self. In sleep, you don't have a name, a job, or a history. The search for a quiet space is actually a search for freedom from the ego. You're tired of being you because being you has become synonymous with carrying everything. If sleep has become your only hiding place, you don't need better sleep hygiene. You need a safer reality. You need to create awake spaces that feel as safe as the darkness behind your eyelids. Before you go to sleep as an escape, give yourself 1 hour of liminal space. No phone, no lights, no goals. Just sit in the dark or a quiet room. Prove to your brain that it's possible to be off the grid while still being awake. When you wake up and feel that immediate dread, don't fight it. Say, I am feeling the weight again. I don't have to carry it all in the first 10 minutes. Find ways to escape during the day that aren't sleep. A 5-minute walk where you leave your phone behind, or staring out a window for 10 minutes. These are mini-sleeps for the soul that help prevent the total system shutdown at the end of the day. The fact that your soul is seeking a space to be quiet is a sign of life, not a sign of laziness. It means the core of who you are is still fighting to survive. It's just looking for the only shelter it knows. This is where the cycle finally breaks. We've talked about drowning, the escape of sleep, and the silent fracturing. But those things continue as long as we keep up the pretense of being okay. The path to lightness isn't paved with more strength. It is paved with the great admission. There is a psychological phenomenon where naming an emotion actually reduces its power over your nervous system. When you keep your exhaustion voiceless, it remains a giant, looming shadow. But the moment you look at someone, or even just a mirror, and say, I am deeply emotionally exhausted, you turn that shadow into a manageable object. From I am broken to I am depleted. Admission changes the narrative from a character flaw to a temporary state of energy. It moves the problem from your identity to your inventory. You aren't a failure, you just have an empty warehouse. As we discussed before, the most draining part of exhaustion is the performance. Asterisk. When you admit you aren't okay, you finally stop the internal war. You stop the constant friction between the tired self and the performing self. Asterisk. The moment you say, I can't do this today, the energy you were using to hide your fatigue is suddenly returned to you. That is where the first spark of lightness comes from. Not from the exhaustion leaving, but from the lying stopping. When you are always the strong one, you are living under an invisible contract that says, I will always provide, and I will never need. Asterisk admission is your way of tearing up that contract. Asterisk. By saying I'm not okay, you give the people around you permission to be human too. You might find that the anchors holding you underwater were actually held in place by your own refusal to let go. When you admit your tiredness, you allow others to step up, or more importantly, you allow the world to simply stop for a moment without it ending. You cannot heal a person you are constantly criticizing. As long as you're forcing yourself to be fine, you are acting as your own harsh taskmaster. Admission is the first act of self-kindness. Asterisk. It is the bridge that allows you to move from, how do I fix this, to what do I need? You stop treating yourself like a broken machine and start treating yourself like a tired friend. This shift in tone is the only environment in which emotional reoxygenation can happen. How do you start this path to lightness without it feeling like a total collapse? The no justification policy. Start admitting your limits without explaining them. I don't have the capacity for this right now is a complete sentence. You don't need a fever or a doctor's note to be emotionally sick. Find one person, or even a journal, where you can be ugly tired. Somewhere you don't have to fix your hair, watch your tone, or be inspiring. Just a place to be a saturated sponge. Before you check your emails or your social media, check your internal weather. Ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much lightness do I have today? If the answer is 2, then your schedule for the day must reflect a 2 capacity. Admitting you are tired is not a white flag of surrender. It is a declaration of truth. And as the saying goes, the truth will set you free. But first, it will make you realize just how heavy that mask of strength really was.